Day my husband's lawyer called to say the estate was finally settled. I was standing in the kitchen making tea I didn't really want, staring out at the backyard where Harold had planted 3 apple trees the summer before he got sick. That was 14 months ago. The trees were still there. I wasn't sure I was. My daughter called that same evening. She lived 40 minutes away in Oakville, and she had her father's voice, calm, measured, the kind of voice that made you feel like everything had already been figured out. I remember sitting down at the kitchen table when I heard it, the way I always did when she had something to say. "Mom," she said, "we've been talking, Jeff and I, about you." I told her I was fine. "I know you're fine," she said. "That's not what this is about." What it was about, she explained, was the money. Harold had left me the house outright and a retirement fund that was, by our standards, comfortable. Not rich, comfortable, enough that I could live the rest of my life without worrying, if I was careful. I'd been careful my whole life. I knew how to be careful. But my daughter said she and her husband had been doing some research. They had a friend who was a financial advisor. The money was just sitting there, she said. It could be working, it could grow. There were better ways to manage it than leaving it in an RBC account collecting almost nothing in interest. "We just want to help, Mom. That's all this is." I should tell you about my son-in-law. Jeff had worked in commercial real estate for 12 years. He wore nice shoes, and he always ordered wine at dinner that cost more than our groceries used to. He'd never said anything unkind to me, not once. He was very good at that, at never saying anything unkind. I told my daughter I would think about it. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed and listened to the house make its sounds, the furnace cycling on, the branch of the oak tree scraping the eave, the particular creak of the third stair that I'd been meaning to fix since 2019, and I thought about Harold. He had handled the finances, not because I couldn't, but because he liked it, and I let him, the way long marriages settle into their grooves. After 38 years, you stop fighting over who does what and just do it. I hadn't looked at a spreadsheet in decades. That, I think, was what my daughter was counting on. She called again the following Tuesday. She and Jeff had made an appointment with their friend, the financial advisor, a man named Preston, and they thought I might want to come along, just to talk. No commitment, just to understand what the options were. I went. Of course I went. She was my daughter. She was 41 years old, and she wore her father's expression when she was concentrating, that small furrow between the brows, and I could not look at it without feeling like I owed her something. Preston had an office in Burlington, the kind of office with a credenza and a leather chair and a framed print on the wall of some kind of abstract landscape. He shook my hand and he spoke slowly, and he used phrases like optimized portfolio and sheltered growth. And he smiled often enough that I kept feeling like I must have understood more than I did. The plan, as he explained it, was to consolidate my accounts, move everything into a joint management structure where Jeff would act as a co-signer, for convenience, Preston said, so that if I was ever unwell or unavailable, there would be no delays in accessing funds. It was very common, he said. Very sensible for someone in my situation. I asked what my situation was. He smiled. A widow with assets and no immediate family support in financial matters. My daughter reached over and squeezed my hand. I said I would need some time. What I didn't say was that something had shifted in me, sitting in that chair in that office with the abstract landscape. Something small, a discomfort I couldn't name yet. The way Preston had looked at Jeff when I asked that question, just for a half second, before he smiled at me. I drove home alone. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at Harold's apple trees and I thought about the feeling. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I was a school librarian for 31 years in Hamilton. I believe in the goodness of people. I have had to work at this belief at times, but I have maintained it. I do not like what suspicion does to a person. But I called my own bank the next morning. I called RBC and asked to speak with someone about my accounts. A woman named, and I remember this because it struck me, a woman named Joy helped me. She walked me through everything, the checking account, the savings, the registered retirement income fund. She told me the current balances. She told me that no changes had been made to the account holders. She asked if I had any concerns. I said I wasn't sure. She said if I ever wanted to add or review a power of attorney, that was something I should do with my own legal counsel, not through a third-party advisor. I wrote that down. Then I called Margaret. Margaret is my oldest friend. We'd met in 1987 at a community potluck in Dundas, and we've been talking on the phone at least twice a week ever since. She lost her husband the year before I lost Harold, and she is one of the few people I know who doesn't flinch when I mention his name. I told her everything. Preston, the cosigner idea, Jeff's shoes, the look. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Vivian, she said, do you have a lawyer? Harold and I had used a firm in Ancaster for the estate. I still had the number. I called the next day and made an appointment with the same solicitor who had helped us with Harold's will, a brisk, thorough woman in her late 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and did not waste words. Her name was Caldwell. That was what I always called her, Caldwell. I brought everything, the notes from Preston's office, the language my daughter had used on the phone, the name of the joint management structure. Caldwell listened. She asked a few questions. She typed something on her computer. Then she took off her glasses and let them hang on the chain. What they're describing, she said, is a co-signing arrangement that would give your son-in-law legal authority over your accounts. That is not a power of attorney, it is not a formal arrangement with any oversight, and it is not something I would advise. I asked her what she thought I should do. First, she said, don't sign anything. Second, let me look at your current estate documents. Third, we need to update your power of attorney, formally, on your terms, naming someone you trust implicitly. I told her I trusted Margaret. She nodded. Then let's start there. We spent an hour and a half in that office. When I left, I had an appointment to return the following week to sign a new power of attorney and a revised will. I had also paid for a consultation. It was the best money I had spent since Harold died. My daughter called that weekend. She was wondering when I'd had a chance to think about Preston's proposal. She was friendly about it. She was always friendly about it. I told her I'd been doing some thinking, yes. She said she was glad. She said she and Jeff really felt this was the right move. She said that managing finances alone at my age was a lot to carry, and they didn't want me to be under that kind of stress. I let her talk. She had her father's voice, but she did not have his instincts. Harold had always known when I had something to say, had always left the pause. When she finished, I said, I spoke with Caldwell. A silence. Our lawyer, I said, about the proposal. Another silence, shorter. Mom, that wasn't, you didn't need to. She helped me update my power of attorney, I said, and my will. It's all sorted now. Margaret is my attorney. Everything is in order. The silence this time was different. I recognized it. It was the silence of a calculation. Okay, my daughter said. Okay, of course that's your decision. Yes, I said. It is. We said goodbye. I'm not sure either of us meant it the way we usually did. I want to be careful here, because this is the part people always want to make simpler than it is. My daughter was not a monster. She had not sat across a table and told me she wanted to steal from me. She probably told herself a version of this story where she was helping, where Jeff had seen an opportunity and it would benefit everyone, where I was old and alone and couldn't really be trusted to manage things. People find ways to believe what is convenient for them. I know this. I spent 31 years watching children decide what the story meant before they'd finished reading it. But I also know what I saw in Preston's office. And I know what the accounts would have looked like if I'd signed. Caldwell had been very clear about that. Once Jeff had co-signing authority, he could make withdrawals, restructure investments, redirect funds, not all at once. Gradually, enough to look like management. I thought about that word, management. I went back to Caldwell the following Thursday. I signed the new power of attorney. I signed the revised will. I left a sealed envelope with her containing a letter to my granddaughter, my other daughter's girl, who was 7 and lived in Victoria and liked frogs and chapter books about animals. telling her about the maple tree I'd planted in the backyard this spring after Harold died, and why I'd planted it and what I hoped she might do with the land one day. It wasn't a dramatic letter, it was just a true one. Walking out of Caldwell's office into the November air, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Not happiness, exactly. Not relief. Something more like being located, like knowing where I was on a map. My daughter and I still speak. It is different now. There are things neither of us says, and we both know the shape of them, the way you know the shape of a door in a dark room without touching it. We have Christmas together, and she brings Jeff, and he pours the wine, and I thank him, and we talk about other things. I don't carry anger about it. That surprised me, actually. I expected to. But anger requires a kind of investment I didn't have to spare, and I had better things to do with what I had left. I fixed the third stair, finally, hired a man from the neighborhood who'd retired from contracting and did small jobs for people on the street. It took him 20 minutes. I stood in the hallway and watched him work, and I thought about how long I'd been stepping over that stair, stepping around it, working it into my own careful movements, as if the problem were just a feature of the house. It was a Tuesday morning in December. Snow had come overnight, the soft, early kind that makes everything very quiet. I made tea I actually wanted. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at Harold's apple trees, bare and dark against the white yard, and I thought that in the spring I would finally learn to prune them properly. Harold had always done it, but Harold had shown me, once, years ago, and I had paid more attention than he knew. Some things you carry without realizing how well you're carrying them. I think about that Tuesday morning in December more than I expected to. The snow, the tea I actually wanted, the stair that finally didn't creak. It's strange, the things that become symbols without your permission. When I look back at what happened, at Preston's office, at my daughter's careful phone calls, at Jeff's nice shoes and his measured smile, I don't see a villain. I see something more ordinary and more troubling than that. I see people who had decided that my age made me a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. And I see myself at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, deciding whether to agree with them. I didn't, and I want to be honest about why, because it wasn't courage. Not at first. It was a feeling, a small, quiet wrongness that I almost talked myself out of. The moment I didn't talk myself out of it, that was the moment everything changed. Jeff never said anything dishonest to my face. Neither did my daughter. That's the part people find hardest to understand when I try to explain it. There was no villain speech. There was just a gradual, gentle pressure, the kind that wears the shape of love and care, until you realize that what's being carved away is your own judgment, your own authority over your own life. I called my bank. I called Caldwell. I called Margaret. 3 phone calls that took less than an hour of my life, and they changed everything about what came next. Not because I was clever. I've never thought of myself as particularly clever, but because I was willing to ask questions out loud instead of just swallowing my discomfort to keep the peace. That willingness, I think, is something we earn over a long life or we don't. It requires a kind of integrity about your own instincts, a refusal to dismiss the small voice that says something is wrong before you can prove it. And it requires the discipline to act on what you know, even when acting feels unkind, even when the people on the other side of the table are your own family. I won't pretend the resolution was clean. My daughter and I are still finding our way back to each other, slowly, around the shape of what was almost done. Christmas is civil. Some conversations are careful. There are silences I've made my peace with. But the will is updated. The power of attorney is in order. Margaret holds it. The house is mine. And when I stand at the kitchen window in the morning and look out at Harold's apple trees, I feel something I've been trying to find the right word for. It isn't triumph. It isn't bitterness. It's closer to what I used to feel at the end of a school year, watching a child finally read a sentence they've been struggling with for months. That quiet, private satisfaction of knowing that the thing that needed doing got done, and that you were the one who did it. You don't need to be loud to protect what's yours. You just need to be clear. I'm still learning. at 68 what it means to be clear, but I'm learning it in my own house, on my own terms, with a cup of tea I made because I wanted it. That is enough. That has always been enough.